I'm with Bryan Cantrill. He's the CTO of Joyent. Bryan's just been on stage on quite an interesting panel discussion where he was really keen on containers.
It's true.
I'd like you to just tell me why containers are important to Joyent and why they're important to the data center.
Sure. So containers represent a shift in our level of abstraction in terms of the way we virtualize workloads. So we have to virtualize in the stack in order to be able to run disjoint workloads. And historically, the way we virtualize has been at the machine layer with a virtual machine. And the abstraction from a virtual machine is hardware. And you run on that virtual hardware, you put on a virtual operating system, a guest operating system, and then your app is on top of that. So that's your stack. And it seems fine, it's good, it works, it allowed us to do a bunch of consolidation a decade ago. But now the virtual machine abstraction that has taken us so far is beginning to show its age. Because actually in an all virtual world, that ends up being the wrong layer of abstraction. Why is everybody running their own OS kernel on top of the one operating system on this hardware? A much better model is to raise the level of abstraction from the machine to the operating system, where what you give each tenant is not a virtual machine, but a virtual OS. You've got one OS kernel, and that OS kernel can see the way all resources are being utilized, and you give each tenant a container. And when you do that, you get much better resource efficiency. You've got your I/O latency goes way down, because when you're doing I/O in that application stack that needs to do I/O through a guest operating system, through the actual hypervisor, that extra hop is not making anything any faster. It's slowing you down from a latency perspective, and it's impeding tenancy. The number of VMs you can put on a machine versus the number of containers you can put on a machine, these aren't comparable. This is another order of magnitude step between VMs and containers. And especially those that are running their own DCs, the container revolution is essential. It's going to allow folks to leverage the strengths of the virtualization revolution without paying this horrific VM tax going forward. And it's another order of magnitude. And just as we saw virtualization take off in the early 2000s, because it allowed people to take a bunch of physical infrastructure and condense it, we're seeing the exact same thing. Now my infrastructure can now get another 10x by going from VMs to containers. Much more efficient, much higher performing.
So do containers have an impact on form factor? We saw back in the past with virtualization that was about consolidation. Yeah?
Absolutely.
It was about getting more into that rack. What are containers going to do to the form factor?
Well, I think it's a very provocative question, and there was one of the questions that came up in the panel, are we going to see data centers at the edge? And personally, that is something I think we'll see. I don't know if we're going to see it in the immediate future, but it seems to me that you're going to have to see it in the limit, simply because the speed of light is the thing that we can't negotiate. And if the data is over here and we want to get it over there, you just take the distance and divide through, and that's going to be a minimum on the amount of time it takes to get there. And that's milliseconds for even non-trivial distance, for even small distances, right? So I think we're going to have to get DCs out to the edge. I think it's going to end. But when you go out to the edge, when you go into environments that don't necessarily have the power or the cooling, you want to get a lot of compute power in as small a form factor as possible. So I think containers allow you to kind of push to the edge on one hand, allow you to get a lot done with very little footprint, and then coming back into the DC, they allow you to take now those 1,000 servers, and those can do just a stunning amount of work. It's amazing to me, in part because we run at such high levels of tenancy. When you get these folks, just kind of casually toss around numbers about 10,000 servers, and I think 10,000 servers, that is. I refuse to believe that, especially with virtual machines, people are deploying 10,000 machines in a way that is used efficiently. I just don't buy it. That you can get such a colossal amount of work done with that kind of compute horsepower, that I think when we go to containers, we're going to realize a lot of those actual efficiencies. And what you're going to see is people driving their infrastructure a lot harder, and not having, instead of having to just kind of build out to the horizon, be able to say, how can we go back into our DCs and get a lot more work out of them, instead of having to constantly break new ground.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bryan. That was enlightening.